Welcome to our webcast, Next Generation Industrial HMIs. I'm your moderator, Jack Smith, and I'm happy to join you today on behalf of Control Engineering and CFE Media. I'm now happy to introduce today's distinguished speakers, Dennis Brandel and John Boyd. Dennis Brandel is the founder and chief consultant for Cary, North Carolina-based BR&L Consulting. And he specializes in helping companies using manufacturing IT, and this includes applications such as business to manufacturing integration, MES solutions, general and site recipe implementations, and automation system cybersecurity. He has been involved in automation, MES, and batch system design and implementation in a wide range of applications for the past 30 years, including biotech, pharmaceutical, chemical plants and oil refineries, food manufacturing, consumer packaged goods, and aerospace systems. Dennis is an active member of the ISA 95 Enterprise Control System Integration Committee, a co-author of the MESA B2MML standards, a member of the ISA 99 Industrial Cybersecurity Standards Committee, former chairman of the ISA 88 Batch System Control Committee, and has participated in the development of OPC and other industrial standards. Dennis writes a monthly column on IT manufacturing in Control Engineering magazine. He has a master's degree in physics and has designed, built, and tested components for advanced aerospace and laboratory applications. John F. Boyd is the technology leader at Maverick Technologies. He joined the firm in 2010 and took the position of technology leader in 2011. He has 34 years of experience in the management, design, and integration of control systems related to process automation. His experience includes project management, software engineering, instrumentation specification, installation and commissioning of complex control systems. He continues to enhance the value of automation to Maverick's customers in the food and beverage, manufacturing, mining and mineral, utility and power, and water wastewater industries. John was a naval nuclear propulsion supervisor and operator, and after excelling in this field, he was appointed as a staff instructor for the Naval Training Propulsion Unit for 4 years. John founded 2 system integration companies in the Northwest before returning to California. He is a member of International Society of Automation. Dennis, you're our first presenter today. Let's get started. The floor is all yours.
Well, thank you, Jack, for the introduction, and good afternoon to everybody. I hope you find this interesting because we're going to talk about this next generation of industrial HMIs, or human-machine interfaces. For those people who have young kids, your kids would probably not think of this as the next generation of HMIs because it turns out that industrial control systems, HMIs, tend to lag a generation behind the consumer industry and the gaming type industry. So we're going to be talking about some sort of the things that are going on today that have actually been refined enough and developed enough that we can actually use them in industrial situations. We also have had to wait because of these generational gaps for the white-haired guys and gals who have been operating a lot of the machinery to retire and the newer generations to come out and say, oh, we are much more used to advanced HMIs. So there are some emerging technologies like 3D virtual reality robots. I just recently saw a virtual reality scuba diving system where you're suspended and you're swimming through the ocean. That's not what we're really going to talk about. What we're going to talk about are what is the next generation that's coming in industrial systems, which has been developed for the problems that we have and the situations that we have in industrial control. And we start out by saying, okay, it's not your father's HMI. I'm sure that you have all seen the HMI displays that were originally developed as soon as the color displays became available. And those color displays, we had flames that were moving, we had spinning turbines, we had moving parts. I myself am guilty of that when I was on the dark side, which for an engineer means that I was in marketing for a while. I was building my own garish displays with rainbow colors and all sorts of things on there. This is not the problem space that we're trying to address there. You know, what we're looking at is it's not a video game where you're supposed to discover hidden items. What we're really looking for is a system that gives us visibility into what's actually going on inside the facility. So this next generation HMI, industrial HMIs, are based on human factors engineering, which didn't even exist very much. 10, 15 years ago, people talked about it. People had set up some laboratories, but it wasn't really pervasive. It wasn't really used everywhere. But human factors has now progressed quite a bit. So it's task-focused, which means we are designing HMIs exactly for what the tasks are for the people who are using them. Standards-based, so that HMIs which come from different systems will have similar look and feel and behavior. It's like when you get into a car. If every car manufacturer had a different design for how you steered the car, one had a wheel, one had a joystick, another one has two joysticks, learning how to drive a new car would be difficult. But the standards give us the capability to say, oh, okay, if I can operate in one of these environments, I should be able to operate in other ones with a minimal amount of training. We also have mobile devices which have become available, which are just becoming much more pervasive in there. And the key to this in this next generation system is that these are really digital assistants that we are providing. And as we say here, it's just not grayscales and muted colors as the next generation. It is really task-focused, standards-focused. And there was a comment in Intech magazine that there's a frustrated artist residing in many of us, but HMI screen design is not a place to express those urges. That's a very valid comment to have. You have to ask yourself, who is creating your HMIs? Are they aware of what we mean today with high-performance HMIs? And John's going to talk quite a bit about that as well. But those people who understand that are the ones who really should be designing the HMIs. Not necessarily your general engineer, definitely not your sales and your marketing people, because they don't really necessarily understand the tasks that are going to be accomplished using those. Now, to help in this area, there are some standards associated with it, and some standards that were just recently developed was the ISA 101 standard, Human Interfaces for Process Automation Systems. The goal here was to try and pretty much standardize what it is we want in an HMI in this industrial system. What are the requirements for that? And one of the requirements for it was really to assess in early detection and diagnosis of response to abnormal situations. If we look inside facilities and we see where most of the errors occur, most of the problems occur, most of the mishaps occur, a large number of these are simply based upon the fact that the operator never saw the problem, that they were overwhelmed with information, most of it irrelevant, and therefore missed the problem that was really the important part of it. The goal behind the ISA standards and the other standards are really to focus operator attention to the important things that are going on, to provide what's called situational awareness, to be aware of what's happening, to see what the process state is, and to see what that state's going to be in the future. If you haven't looked at 101, it's a good standard to read. It's not extensively long, so it's worthwhile. It's a good thing to keep in your mind as you're designing your new HMI displays and your new screens. The other one to look at coming from ISA and IEC is also the alarm standard. So there's a whole section in there, a whole clause that talks about the HMI design for alarm systems, and it's the management of alarm systems. Because to a large extent, we are using our HMIs today not necessarily to control the process, But we're really using our HMIs to monitor it, to see what's going on, so that if something goes wrong, we can take care of that. So we have visibility into it, and we can see what's going on there. There's a couple other HMI standards you can look at if you're not necessarily in the process industries or you can't get easy access to the ISA ones. One of these is from the nuclear regulatory agencies. I've used this one in the past prior to the development of 101. And this is an environment or an industry where operator errors can really be, to put it mildly, catastrophic, and we don't really want that to happen. So there is a whole set of guidelines that deal with how you set up a system so that people can see what is going on, so people can see that there are problems, and when the problems are there, they can focus in on the problems immediately. So the guidelines for group views and soft control, procedure automation. Now, computer-based procedure systems are probably part of the next generation HMI. This is the case, again, where we have a digital assistant that is helping you walk through these things so you don't have to go and find SOPs and paper and do these sort of things. So ISA standards and the IEC standards and nuclear regulatory standards are only some of them. There are several other HMI standards out there, but the key is they all try to drive the same thing. They all say, make sure operators can see what's going on. They have visibility. They are directed immediately to problems. Now, these are driving this next generation HMI, so we're not having those garish colors. We're not having the moving flames because those distract operators. Part of the problem with the garish colors and the rainbows that we had to show statuses is I have to ask the question, how many of your operators are colorblind? 10% of the U.S. population, or 10% of the population of the world, is colorblind. And if many of your operators tend to be male, then it's probably closer to 20% of your operators are colorblind. You can't use color as an indicator of information. This is one of the things that shows up in the HMI standards. They also talk about other things like when you have next generation HMIs, you have to be aware of what the ambient lighting is out there and how you're going to light the screens. And as we move to mobile displays, how many of your operators really need reading glasses? And how many of them have the reading glasses on when they're actually operating the equipment? If you take a look at the small screens we have nowadays, they might be using a 7-inch screen. They might be using a 5-inch screen. You know, how big does that font have to be for them to be able to read it versus looking at a monitor that's 3 to 5 feet away where you can have a much bigger character and people can actually look at it. So the HMI standards are enabling us to use the mobile technologies, the new technologies that are coming out, and are enabling us to use the human factors engineering that has really come forward as a result of problems that have shown up. Now, some of the next big pieces that are coming up are enabling IIoT in Industry 4.0, and how does that affect it? And John is going to talk about that right now.
Thank you, Dennis, and thank you, Jack, for the nice introduction. So I'll be talking about HMI enabling industrial Internet of Things and Industry 4.0. So wanted to touch a little bit on the Internet of Things, which as you see with even your homes and your life, everything seems to be connected to Ethernet ports. You got Ethernet ports on everything, TVs, your home automation, your just about everything has an Ethernet port or wireless connection. So all that additional information and the industrial is adapting that to the industrial environment, and it really has exploded. I can remember, not to date myself, 20 years ago, you'd be lucky to have an Ethernet switch in an industrial environment. Now there's just, in some plants, or maybe 50 or 60 of them, and that's on another subject of trying to control that with all the data that's flowing through. And so with that, the AC drives, instrumentation, overloads, there's just so much information out there now that's coming up through, and the modern HMI has to be able to filter that, and that kind of goes back to what Dennis was talking about of having standards, of having the high-performance graphics, so you can emphasize the information that's important to the operator, but also be able to get to that information. You know, the information now where you just had a process variable before, now you have smart transmitters that are going to give you the secondary and tertiary and all this added information, and which is great and helpful, which would be a distraction to the operator if it's not handled correctly. And now there's even metadata. So a tag within your controller, whatever that may be, now they're enabling metadata within that. So just an enormous amount of data is being propagated through the HMI. So the HMI has to be able to deal with that. And one of the standards, or OLA for process control, allows a standardized way of controlling or controlling that amount of information that's coming into the modern HMI. And again, looking for those standards that are out there, for example, OPC. A lot of different systems have their own drivers, and those are sometimes limited. So again, one of the technologies is OPC, nicknamed OPC, but it's OLA for process control. And then also Industry 4.0 is another place where a lot of data is being aggregated through the HMI. So the Industry 4.0, it's a collective term for technologies and concepts and value change organization. So what does that mean is all that data now that you were collecting through the HMI or presenting through the HMI, well, now it's going all the way through the business chain. It's coming up through your ERP system, and then through your MES and ERP system and above to drive business decisions. So again, the modern HMI is going to have a lot more data that's going through there, and that they're all part, and over time becoming part of the cloud and the smart factory. So as far as now some of the new things in smartphone and tablets, Dennis is going to talk about.
Okay, yeah, smartphones and tablets are arguably, I could say, one of the most significant changes that have occurred to impact social behavior today. Everybody seems to have a smartphone. Everybody seems to have a tablet available. If you walk down the street, you'll walk into people because they're looking down at their smartphones and doing stuff all the time. It's made a major change. It's always connected. Again, the younger the people are, the more connected they are. You know what they have for dinner. You know what they had for lunch. You know where they're going the next minute. You know more than you ever really wanted to know about what they're doing. And their social networks even span the globe on what's going on. So you can have friends that you've never physically met that are all the way around the world. To show you how important it is, there were some studies that showed 40% would rather lose their wallets than their cell phones. I guess they imagined if they lost their wallet, they could use their cell phone to cancel the cards, but if they lost their cell phone, they'd be out of touch. And people hate being out of touch. So, yeah, it's a big change. There are everything box, as we talk about today. But, the downside to that is that they are distracting. People are looking at their phones and at their tablets instead of looking out and around to see what they're going to do. Now, in our industry, what we're looking at, what we need to look at, oftentimes is not actually easily visible. And we really do use these and can use these for our own use. So we're going to start to see these. The big changes that are coming here that are really going to impact us are things like flexible displays. If you have seen any of these, they look like something out of a science fiction show, but they're basically a flexible display that can be bent in various directions. So you can imagine that you have one of those wrapped around your arm, and that becomes now your HMI display device. I'll talk a little bit about HTML5 and others later to say, okay, what changes are we going to have to do to actually make those sort of things work? We've also got the head-up displays, whether those are in glasses or in visors that are being shown. But to a large extent, what those are trying to do is simply provide you a hands-free mechanism of looking at the information that you want to see. And that's what is going to happen here as we move to smartphones and tablets. They will be used. They will be used as HMIs because basically, as I said, they're the everything boxes. Your standard smartphone or tablet, which has a phone line on it, has 5 radios inside it of all sorts of different kinds, from Bluetooth to near field to the cell phone to the Wi-Fi and to the GPS that it has in it. It's got cameras on it, which means it can be used as barcode scanners and can be used to determine locations and identify materials and identify equipment. So, are they being used today? Yes, it's being used. They're being used in large-scale facilities, big distribution places where people have traditionally used radios and had to walk over to fixed screens someplace in the environment. Large warehouses, chemical plants, refineries. Yes, definitely, this is where we are seeing these showing up as the next generation HMIs. Generally speaking, we're not talking about the very small smartphones. We're talking about ones that are 5-inch, 6-inch displays, typical tablets, 7 to 10-inch type displays that people are carrying around. You get much bigger than that, it's like carrying around a laptop. Another place where I've seen these is where there's limited space. Some older facilities that I've been in, there's basically no place to put a fixed screen. The only way you can get any sort of HMI into there is to use a mobile device. One thing that's being kicked around right now in the next generation HMIs are to actually use the cameras on it, the forward-facing cameras, to identify and verify the person who's making a change in a regulated industry. It's a whole lot better electronic signature and passwords. It's hands-free. It's basically, I just approved some change and signed it. It took a picture of me so that you could see who it was, and now that becomes the official record. And we're using these because we're primarily changing. We're changing from operating the equipment to monitoring the equipment, because the equipment's getting much more automated everywhere, not just U.S., not just Europe, not just Asia, everywhere in the entire world we're moving to higher and higher levels of automation. And where we are doing work, it's really assisting. It may be loading or unloading. It may be performing functions where it hasn't quite yet come out that it's economically worthwhile to perform these in an automated manner. A lot of times on packaging lines, it's loading things or it's unloading some pieces. And then we're moving to more and more fixed versus floating locations as operators do more and more work, and as we have fewer and fewer operators out there taking care of it. So, all those things are driving the use to smartphones, driving the use to tablets. Yes, they are going to occur. We're going to talk a little bit later about how we actually can apply those into these industries as we're moving forward. But one of the questions that come out here are a couple. These things, they have a very rough usage. People are going to throw them around. People are going to use them, so they got a short lifetime because of the rough usage that are in there. Even though you can buy cases for them, by the time you add heavy-duty cases and everything else, they become much more cumbersome. So what we're talking about here are devices that are going to be replaceable. It's almost the sort of thing, we get them, we use them. If they fail, we've got another one just ready to go. This is a different situation oftentimes than even the hot standby you have for a normal desktop HMI. They've got a short product lifetime. These things only have a couple years. And a couple years later, there's a new one that comes out. So that means we need to be well aware of what it's going to take to upgrade it, how we're going to work in that environment. And that may be a continual problem. And then we have the BYOD, the Bring Your Own Device, which is coming out in a lot of businesses. Now, the question here is, will this show up in manufacturing or not? I'll give you my opinion on that one. Probably not, simply because each of these devices is going to have access to networks and information that you probably want to keep protected. So it will probably be corporate-owned devices, and it'd be passed out like barcode scanners or radios, signed out for the shift, signed back in, with remote access control so you can disable it in case you lose it, those sort of things. Also with on-demand software personalization. So when I pick up a tablet or I pick up a smartphone and I log in, I get my entire view associated with it. So there are some upsides to the new technologies, of smartphones, to the new technologies of tablets. I think we're going to see them in use. They're going to become much more common. Even the desktops we have are becoming much more touchscreen sensitive, simply because that technology is now out there. But the downsides are, when people get distracted, you're going to have corporate rules in there that say you're not allowed to walk while you're looking at your tablet, and because of safety issues. And you're going to have to say you sign these in, you sign these out, you personalize them. We control those because they have access to a lot of the information that we find is extremely valuable. And one of the other places now we talk about is remote monitoring and maintenance, and John's going to talk about that.
Thank you, Dennis. So HMIs from remote monitoring. We've had RTUs out there, typically on serial networks over radios, and now with the industrial Internet of Things, now a lot of those are Ethernet. So the amount of data that can come directly from I use an example of a weather station that used to be serial, and you had to kind of pick and choose what data. Now it just comes flooded across all the data, everything that's going on in that weather station. So that's greatly enhanced the remote monitoring of those remote stations, but also from the standpoint of remote support of the HMI system you have. So with the Internet of Things and the connectivity, and of course you need all the cybersecurity in place, makes it a lot easier for you to get remote support from maybe the vendor that provided the system, or from your own employees or operators remotely, and not wait until they come back to troubleshoot those problems or operate the plant. And for maintenance and troubleshooting, it is drastically enhanced, where either on a tablet, not necessarily so much on a smartphone yet, but on tablets, that they're able to take, the operators and maintenance personnel are able to take that right out. For example, on an instrument, they're having to calibrate it, and they want to see what the HMI is saying. Before, they had to have two operators. Now they can sit there and do all that work themselves directly on the instrument with their calibrator there and the HMI, and do all that, and it cuts their time in half. So for remote support and maintenance and troubleshooting, it's just, I can't tell you, it's just really, really enhanced their ability to do that. The other thing that Dennis was talking about, even from the phones now, even some of the smartphones, being able to get some of the alarms and other data that is being connected into the more advanced or next generation HMIs, you can get a lot of that alarming and notifications and process and alarm rationalization directly on your smartphone over HTML5. And HTML5, as Dennis will talk about, is really, really a game changer. So I'll turn it back over to you, Dennis.
All right, thank you. Because as we're moving and using these new HMIs, remote monitoring and maintenance activities, as well as the production activities, as we're moving to mobile devices, as we're moving to these next generation high performance HMI systems, the question that often comes up is, can I use my existing HMI vendor? Now, I'm not going to talk about specific vendors. This is really kind of general. But the bad news is your current HMI designs are not going to translate to the new generations. Much of the HMI design work and everything else has been based upon non-human factors, non-high performance HMIs. And many of those have limited availability to do the scaling up and down that is really required in the mobile environment, in the environment as we want to move to smartphones and tablets and big screens all simultaneously. This problem is not unique, though, to the industrial world, so that there are a lot of solutions out there, and the most major vendors are moving to provide those solutions through something called HTML5, which is the latest version of HTML that's out there, and it provides the ability to do dynamic displays, to rescale, resize, and reformat, which is the important part, the displays so that information that you're seeing on a 5 or a 6-inch display is not really just a scaled down version of what you're going to see on a 25-inch or a 32-inch or a 50-inch display that may be in a control room. So bad news is your current designs are probably not going to translate very well because of the changes we talked about. The good news is there are solutions on the way, and the best news is these are really well-defined solutions because they are coming from other industries out there. You probably also will not need to throw out your existing systems, or at least not all of them. All the data collection systems that were talked about, the OPC systems that are out there, the device nets, the Profinets, you name it, the different industrial networks that are out there are still going to exist. Your data collection systems will exist, your historians exist, etc. But chances are today what you're using, your HMI, it's based on an obsolete or soon-to-be obsolete software. Most people today are running Windows 7. There are some running Windows 8 and 8.1, but both Windows 7, 8, and 8.1 have already been obsoleted. There is a move to Windows 10. So if you're running your HMIs in the windowing environment, in the Microsoft Windows environment, you should be aware that you're going to be obsolete continuously. You'll probably never, ever catch up, which says we really need to move to much more secure mobile high-performance platforms that really aren't affected by the underlying operating system. And again, this is where the HTML5 is going to be the game changer for the industrial system, because we're going to design systems that are going to last 10 to 15 years before we actually do the upgrade. We may have to go through 3 or 4 or 5 generations of different display systems during that period in time. So we need something that's going to give us the consistency we want for the visibility, even though the underlying pieces are going to be completely replaced. So this comes with HTML5. It took 10 years in development. It has, now that it's been accepted by all of the major players, all the people who build browsers, all the people who build the smartphones, the tablets, and all the others have bought into the HTML5 models and the standard out there. You can get systems that support it on iOS, the Apples, the Androids, Linux, Windows, you pretty much name it, it's going to be out there. And it's really giving us that first true platform-independent HTMI tool set since we had the old back DOS text displays that were available. The key here is to recognize the fact that it's supported everywhere. It will continue to be supported. It'll have a lifetime, at least the lifetime of the HMIs that we have today. So this is the sort of system you need to move to if you have those options. If your vendor is providing capabilities of building these displays, then the really smart move now is to move to those, because it's going to make your pain a whole lot less when you have to do the upgrades to later systems as well. So this is a major game changer in the whole industrial world. The HTML5 with the mobile technologies, with the high-performance HMIs, with the ability to have these anywhere devices, devices that have cameras and radios and GPSs and voice recognition and all the others built into it, and all those things supported by the HTML5 means that we are finally approaching a point where we're going to be able to build the HMIs and the industrial HMIs that are going to give us the security and the safety that we really want. So John's going to talk next about the next generation examples.
Thank you, Dennis. So I'm going to show you, as you've seen on the screen, this is obviously all grayscale with some emphasis colors. But you can see that almost everything on this screen is grayscales or different layers of grayscales. And you can see, if you look a little closer, there's quite a bit of information in this, but it doesn't distract you with colors, and everything is pretty much evenly laid out. So this is it's modified just because there's colors there. High performance standards. And this is something that you have to measure as you're moving forward. In a modern greenfield application, a modern next generation HMI, you have the ability to just use the high performance standards using the grayscales and very little color, except for important emphasis on certain subjects. But the reality is that you have the operators gray-haired and slightly younger, but they're used to seeing some color. So if you're in a brownfield application, which I'm going to show next, is you end up having to put some color in. So this is modified high-performance graphics where we did go in and modify some of the objects that we used that were high-performance objects to allow some color because that's what they wanted. I've seen it at an occurrence at a large marine terminal that it was so drastic of a change, and basically the operators weren't engaged in that discussion of going to straight high-performance graphics, that it caused a rejection of them, and they had to go kind of backwards. So you don't want to have that happen. So just a lessons learned is that the high-performance graphics, they are great, and they do work, provide the correct emphasis and clear information. But you have to also make sure that the operators are willing to accept those, and that you don't give them such a change that it actually causes a rebellion. This next example, again, this is actually one I was talking about before. Internet of Things, plug into the weather station, you get all the data, you put it on the screen, and you're done. And again, all grayscale, very little colors, and nothing moves or anything. It's just a static image, and showing the high performance graphics, and these are very productive. I have examples, or could talk about examples of parts of the plants where we did balance of plant in the high-performance graphics, and we modified or migrated other HMIs to a more modern HMI and brought them all under one, and you can really see the difference. And the customer is actually going back and redoing their other third-party systems with the high-performance graphics. So it is something that, over time the operators do accept, and they actually prefer them over the others. And I think that's all the examples I have, and I thank you for your time, and I'll turn it back over to you, Jack.
Thanks, John, and thanks, Dennis. Now, remember that you can type questions for Dennis and John in the Ask Question box on the screen. We will get to as many of these as we can, and within a few days, the presentation will be available for on-demand viewing on the Control Engineering website, and we'll send you an email message with a link connecting directly to it and to related resources after it's ready. Now, let's get started with some questions. And John, I'm going to send the first question your way. Are there any iPad HMI applications available?
I wouldn't say that there's a development application, but a lot of the vendors do provide an HTML, I would say, server that will take the graphics that you have in your system, and then will provide them in an HTML format. So that's the way you can get them onto your iPad or your your Windows tablet. The great thing with HTML5, as Dennis is stating, doesn't really matter what tablet you're using, it'll work on it. So right now, I don't know of any. Dennis, do you know of any that are just strictly iOS, iPad applications for HMIs?
Yeah, I've seen a couple, but they're very custom focused. I think the one that I saw was it was for a brewery, actually more for a home brewery than anything else. So it wasn't quite professional. But what's happened with the original iOS and the Androids is that people were designing those quite specifically for each environment, so that if I do an iOS application, I can't take that and apply it to the Android. I can't do the Android application. I can't do the Windows, which is why most of the major vendors are now moving to the HTML5 version of it. So if you see one of it and it's only available on Android or it's only available on the iPhone, then just be aware you're going to have some of the portability issues that we talked about, especially during the upgrades and changes that are going to occur.
Okay, Dennis, you get the next question. What level of bring your own device penetration do you expect?
Yeah, this is everybody wants to bring their own device to work, and this oftentimes shows up more in the people who are in the back office and the sales and marketing rather than the engineering folks. I think what will happen is, and I haven't seen a lot of it show up at all in manufacturing, and part of it is because I said the information that you're accessing can be it can be controlled. Now, that being said, there are a lot of vendors out there who provide smartphone access into your data historians. Generally speaking, you'll have to set up some sort of protection mechanism to use those in place. But I haven't seen those being heavily used in the real operational environment. And part of that is that the operational environment's kind of harsh. People don't want to lose their own devices, whereas they might not mind losing their company's device themselves. So I haven't seen a lot of penetration. I expect there'll be a little bit of it, but I still expect that we're going to have a lot more of the corporate assigned mobile devices for them to use, and then those devices will give them access to their social networks or email, corporate email, or whatever else it is that they need to have.
Thanks. So, John, I'm going to send the next question to you. Actually, it's a request. If you could elaborate a little bit more on the use of grayscale and color or the combinations thereof.
So, yeah, and you bet. And we kind of covered that in the examples. And I would say the grayscale, again, in my opinion, I have really like it, and high-performance graphics are based on it. You just have to make sure that you use the colors, almost as an adoption for the operators. You just have to kind of measure their acceptance level, through those as you're modernizing and migrating to the next generation of HMIs. And I think all vendors are supplying those high-performance grayscale objects, and you just have to be careful. I mean, my opinion is you have to give the plant or your customer or your customer being the operations what they need to operate, and if you push them too hard with just complete grayscale, you may have some pushback. Again, greenfield, that it may just work fine, but you can use the colors, but I would use them sparingly just to get the acceptance, and again, to emphasize certain important or extremely important parts of your process.
It's a good answer. So, Dennis, changing gears a little bit here, this question: when will capacitive touch be start to dominate the HMI technology, and what would be the successor to the touch screen interface? That's two questions.
You'll see capacitive touch and touch screens interfaces show up in a lot of places, much more so where you have a control room environment where people are not wearing gloves and other pieces. We actually were using those when I used to work for Shell Oil several decades ago. We had capacitive touch screens as the control mechanism in our environments. Now, when you move out to a plant environment, it gets a little bit more difficult. Depends on the industry you're in. So you're going to start to see it, especially as people move to smartphones and tablets. They may be using a little stylus. They may be using those little pens you have with the little rubber tip on it that you can use. So I think we're going to start to see a lot more of that show up. In terms of what replaces that, what's going to replace it, well, I think, and I've seen these, if you've ever seen the movie Minority Report, I'm sure you've seen the hand gestures that people use to control systems. If you've ever used an Xbox with a Kinect on it, you probably have been using the hand controls to actually control and look at things. That's still emerging technology at best. So this isn't not quite the next generation HMI, but maybe the next generation right after that. We'll start to see those sort of displays, hands-free gestures, controls, voice controls, etc., being used to control the systems. But that's probably, like I said, the generation after this one coming out.
Good answer. So, John, regarding screen density, how many objects can be placed across the screen and still be usable?
All right. It's been my thumb rule to keep it below 40. Not across the screen, but on the screen itself. How you lay those out, depending on the size of your objects and screen resolution. Of course, now with the new higher and higher 4K resolution of even large displays that are ending up in control rooms, they can add more and more to it. But you have to remember that not all of us are as young as others, and it's a little harder to see those objects. And again, if you put too many on the screen, it's going to basically de-emphasize, and it's just going to be, information overload. And so, again, the thumb rule that we tend to use in our organization is not more than 40, and that also helps with the performance of updating that screen, because a lot of times there's a lot of data behind those objects as you open them, and so that's pretty quick answer to that. And again, you really have to look at your screen resolution, and then also how many objects you're going to have on the screen, but the thumb rule is 40.
Sounds good. So, Dennis, I'll throw the next question your way. With only limited software update control on Windows 10 and other smart devices, how should we manage software compatibility?
Yeah, this is a really quite a key problem that's showing up. Your ability to control the updates in the latest Windows environment is much more limited than it used to be. You can set systems up in place, but it's extremely painful. And as we move to the other devices, as we move to the smart devices, it's also the updates tend to be built into those as well. So yeah, that requires that there are gateways in place in your system to control some of those updates. Now, fortunately, we are riding a very large commercial and consumer base in much of the new technologies that we're talking about, which means that those people who are doing the underlying work are being very careful. They don't want to do an upgrade that's going to disable 100 million of their customers, because then they have 100 million very angry customers. So we do have a bit of an advantage there, but you do have to set up DMZs, control and firewalls and protections to prevent the updates from occurring automatically where on your device you don't have the capability to disable that. Now, many of the devices will give you some of that capability, and you can control when they get updated, but it's on almost a device-by-device basis and an OS-by-OS basis. It's a big problem. needs to be addressed, but it's not unique to HMIs. You're probably going to get the same issue on your servers and anything else that you are running out there on the newer environments that are available.
And Dennis, if I may add to that, is a lot of the vendors, DCS and traditional PLC HMI vendors, now their answer is virtualization. So we've had systems that are 12, 13 years old, validated systems, and they just decide to virtualize and bring it into a virtualized environment and then build their new HMI system right alongside the old one and then migrate it over time. So virtualization as far as software incompatibility with is basically to virtualize your old system or virtualize those operating systems that are no longer supported, but at least with some of the virtualization companies, they will support those older OSs. And I can tell you from experience, we've gone from, once in a while we would virtualize the systems to now every single new large system, greenfield or brownfield, is a virtualized data center. And everything is rolled into it. They kind of just go through their control room and say, okay, that tank gauging system, that's going to be virtualized. And so even though they're older operating systems and older operating software, they don't want to change it. So they virtualize it and then bring that in to the modern HMI through other data exchange.
Okay, now this next question I'm going to ask both of you to comment on. And John, we'll start with you. But this viewer says, I understand the trend away from overwhelming operators with graphics and colors, but in the event of alarms, do things at least flash red on these new high-performance graphic standards?
Yes, they do. The alarm banners flash, and the objects will flash colors to emphasize that where the alarm is, and then within the alarm headers, it doesn't really matter which vendor, they all allow you to set in a command that will go directly to that page and that object to emphasize that. So yes, for alarms, that's part of the using color just to emphasize alarms and emergency situations.
Yeah, and the standards don't say don't use colors. The standards say don't use colors exclusively. Don't just color something red and something green and expect that then some operator somewhere is going to be able to tell the difference. And actually, it's not just red and green. There are 4 or 5 different kinds of color blindness that show up. So the standards say don't use just colors, but also use other indications associated with the text, flashing, etc. Again, minimize flashing, hopefully, except for the very high alarms that are out there. The key here is to keep away from the idea of the operators falling asleep, though, and which is a bit of a problem because they are monitoring systems and looking at it and looking for the differences and the changes. That goes back to training more than anything else. I don't know if there's a story here. I got a minute here to tell it, but the issue that showed up, remember the plane crash that occurred in the San Francisco airport, I think it was a Korean Airlines, where the plane crashed right at the beginning of the runway because it missed the runway as it was landing. That was because the pilots did not have the experience in landing the planes. They were doing everything automated themselves. So they really didn't know how to react in the cases of a situation showing up. So just as with other traditional HMIs, you got to have training. Same with the high-performance ones. People just need to be trained to be aware of what they have to do in those situations as well. The gray screens are hopefully not going to put them to sleep because they will see immediately the areas where there are problems, both by colors, by flashing, by additional text, maybe by additional symbols. So that is one of the things that is addressed in the standards for the high-performance HMIs.
Okay, looks like we have time for one more question. And John, you get it.
Okay.
Now, regarding dashboards, what about cut and paste options for easy duplication of control functions across large facilities?
So I'm going to take, if that's a dashboard for a whole screen, I typically, from an HMI standpoint, look at that as the dashboard on the bottom or the top. And typically in the modern or next generation modern HMI, those are all set up as objects. You know, it doesn't matter really which vendor. They all have their different objects that you can make one and keep that in your object library, and then across the whole facility you can just drag and drop it or cut and paste it to every HMI, or you can make a template screen that has all those and just copy and paste it and add your graphics. What do you think, Dennis?
Yeah, I agree. We're going to see a lot of that. I mean, the purpose there is to have consistency, and a lot of the vendors now are supplying their own individual templates. We've talked about it, and so that when you're installing their device or their system in there, they'll give you a graphical template you can drag and drop into existing graphics that you have, and if you're all following, again, the same standards that are out there, then it looks like it was actually built into part of it. So there's still some emerging technologies there. There's FDT that's out there for devices that's going to make it easier to do more of the drag and drop. And also many of the vendors have automatic configuration, so that once you've actually created the tags and created the devices, not just a tag, but actually a device like a PID loop or a valve or something like that, or a pump or a motor, it will actually create the template and create the whole graphical object that's going to show up on that screen for you automatically. That's really an advantage to making it easier and easier to build the displays and to maintain them.
Okay, I'd like to thank the audience for submitting your great questions, and thanks again to our great speakers, Dennis Brandel and John Boyd, for sharing their time and their expertise.